Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sebentar lagi kita akan memulai acara dan kita akan mulai tepat di pukul 7 PM WIB. Mohon ditunggu sekitar 1 menit lagi akan kami mulai. Okay, Prof. Oki Karnarajasa is also here with us today. Prof. Taiful Mahmud is with us. Pak Acep Purkon, founder of ForTi, Pak Adam Bakhtiar dari DP, ada Prof. Azhar Zam dari Basel, Switzerland, ada Prof. Aziz Muhammad, the chairman of I4 from Tokyo, and we have several members from ForMind and also I4 joining with us today. Ada Pak Hendra Hermawan, DMD of I4 for Canada, and Prof. Taiful Mahmud, before I already mentioned, from MD from United States. Ada Pak Lisman, also our founder from LIPI. And ada Pak Taufik Hidayat, also our founder from Bandung, from UPI Bandung. Ada DMD from Brunei Darussalam also joining with us today. For Southeast Asia ada Pak Wahyu Sasendra dan banyak lagi yang hari ini sedang hadir. Terima kasih banyak sudah menghadiri. Saya ingin menyapa sedikit rekan-rekan semua. Okay, very good evening. I would like to now open the session since now we are already 7 p.m. in Jakarta. And I would like to greet our honorable guest, Pak Teguh Rahardjo, the chairman for DP, and also Dr. Krista Zanetti, our main speaker for today in our session 3 on grant funding. We also have our funders of ForMind Institute as well as ForMind here with us today, the ones that I already mentioned. We have the chairman for I4, Indonesian International Scholars Association, who are spread out globally all over the world. And now we have the managing directors and deputy managing directors from various regions joining with us today. And one of them is Professor Taiful Mahmud, who will be also joining with us on the discussion on the US grant management system later in the second session. So I'm very proud to announce to you that we have successfully launched the first series of world-class scientists, series 1, inviting reputable speakers from all over the world, covering grant funding, also on the scientific writing, and women in science, encouraging researchers all over the world to be more globally competitive. And because of the many requests, we launched our world-class scientist online seminar. This is the series 2, and we have the first speaker, who is also an Indonesian diaspora. Distinguished Professor Indra Mahlia has already given a talk for the first session, and the previous session, Dr. Inaya Rahmani from UI and Dr. Ross Tapsel from ANU gave a second session. So we are now already in the third session, and we're going to talk about something very, very important, which is, of course, something that researchers can't live without. We are actually demanded to keep on writing grants because research needs money and research needs grants. And now how to get good grants. And that is how we invite 2 very, very reputable speakers with us today. One is from Director of DP, Pak Teguh Rahardjo, who will be talking about the grant management and the funding, a little bit overview, how it's run in Indonesia for the first 10 minutes. And then later on, Krista will be talking for about 30 minutes for the first session. Okay, so I would like to again remind everyone to please keep your speaker muted, and later on we will open the session for discussion. And this is about the rules for today's seminar. So we will be muting all of the participants, and then we are going to open the chat feature. So if you have any questions all through the talk, you are free to type your questions and send the message to all participants, and we'll be collating all your questions, and then we will be asking the speaker during the Q&A session. So please make sure to join the Zoom room using the name that you're registered with. I think everyone has already done so. And so without further ado, I'm on behalf of ForMind Institute, as the chairman of ForMind Institute, I would like to greet Pak Teguh Rahardjo, the Executive Director of Dana Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia, DP, and he will be giving us the first opening remarks. Please, Pak Teguh, the time is yours.
Thank you, Saskia. Good evening for the participants in Indonesia and Asia. Good morning for Krista in US. So and probably others participants from Europe. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the occasion to share some program that managed by DP. I would like, just to share you some, situation in Indonesia, and also what DP now managing the research scheme that probably interested for all of you. All. Next, please. Just skip this one. Go to the next slide. Yes. Just brief about DP. It's launched by Minister of Finance as the independent funding agency under the auspice of the Indonesian Academy of Science on March 2016. So this is still new. This is a new kid in the block, I think. Even though, we also have previous experience before we established before we built the DP. The mission is to improve the research ecosystem to provide a flexible, competitive, and sustainable research grant, increasing the advanced and qualified research, to provide the research management service to become the trust research funding institution. So I think the establishment of the DP is kind of like a big breakthrough in the from the point of view the R&D infrastructure in Indonesia, because this is the independent funding agency. Most of the funding agency is under the governments or managed by the government itself. There are not so many funding agencies in Indonesia, especially who provide the competitive grant. So, like Minister of Research and Technology also have a grant that competitive, but there are grant only for the researcher from the university. Then there also have a grant for researcher not only university but also the public research institution. And probably you already know also there are quite new funding agency under the Minister of Finance. Name is LPDP. They provide also competitive grant, but mostly they're focusing on the downstream research. So while the Minister of Research and Technology grant, they cover almost all of the research category. But in terms of DP, mostly we established to especially to provide or to focus on the basic research. As probably you know that the investment of basic research in Indonesia is quite small. Most of the research probably we cannot say is a basic, but it's kind of like academic research. So that's why we try to improve and to guarantee that they can explore the curiosity research within quite long duration and get fixed funding support from whatever the funding that work together with DP. Even though we are still new, just 4 years, but we have several experience working with MRC UK for infection disease. We conducted the joint call in 2016, and now there are still 6 projects ongoing. We also conduct the joint call with RC UK. Probably not, the name is already changed, becoming UKRI, if I am not wrong. So at the moment, we still manage 5 projects. Probably until next year's, they got they get the project funding from us for 3 years, and we also becoming the Secretariat for Southeast Asia AU Joint Funding Scheme since 2017. At that time is the second call, and we now also support 2 projects of the third call of the joint funding scheme, focusing on nanotechnology. So while in the ongoing project call, currently we just launched the several program in Indonesia, such as the RISPRO International Collaboration, now already in the scientific panel evaluation, and also Research Innovation Diaspora Call. The status is the same, preparing for the scientific panel evaluation, and Newton Fund Indonesian Impact Scheme. This is also now preparing for scientific panel evaluation, but the one that's still open for proposal submission is the 5th SNT call and the 6th innovation call of the Southeast Asia AU Joint Funding Scheme. Next, please. Now I try to concentrate on what is the South Asia AU Joint Funding Scheme. So this program is actually a bi-regional joint call for proposal, improving national funding agency in ASEAN and also AU. Funding can be provided by the national, either the local or regional funding agency, or their own researchers according to its own regulations. And the central management of GFS is supported by EC under the service facility. So the basic rule of this scheme is this is open for all of funding agency, and the funding mechanism is virtual common pot, so no money crossing border. Funding of research and innovation. This is because this is the regional, so this is multilateral, not bilateral. The consortium must consist of 2 + 1. 2 from ASEAN, or 2 from Europe, 1 from ASEAN, and so on, and vice versa. So the agreement is follow the national regulation, and the funding up to 36 months or 3 years, and the number is vary between 100 until 400 euro per country. Next, please. This is the ongoing project. The first call in 2017, there are 9 Europeans and 5 South Asia Funding Agency involved. The total proposal 50, and the focus, the theme is in health and environment or climate change. So from 50 proposal, 10 proposal is funded. So the total of money is up to 3.3 million euros. While the second joint call, 2018, it was participated by 9 European and 9 Southeast Asia. So the number of funding agency from ASEAN increased. While other that, there are also still many countries that participate, even those they are not have funding from, not have support from the their own funding agency, but they can still join this scheme as a partner. So you can see this is the proposal, the number of proposal from each country, and then the proposal evaluation. There are, for example, the focus, the theme is in bioeconomy and infection disease. You can see here that the number of proposal not so big, because we realize that the main problem is in to find a partner. That's why the number proposal is usually between under 20 or between 20 and 30. And the third call, next please. The third call last year, this is also, you can see, is followed by 5 European and 8 ASEAN funding agency. The thematic area is integrated water resource management and nanotechnology. Because this is the SNT call, so one of the requirement is it should be basic research up to technology readiness level 4. And the fourth innovation call, also last year, is followed by 3 European and 10 ASEAN funding agency. The thematic is infection disease and smart city. And the category of research is applied. This is the technology readiness level is more than 3. And you can see here the number of proposals from each country, and about the 12 projects from both call funded. And next, please. This is the ongoing. This is my last slide. The fifth call, SNT call, and the sixth call, innovation call. So I think the scheme are same, bi-regional, multilateral. This is type of consortium, multidisciplinary, transnationality. For the fifth call, the deadline is December 15 this year. The thematic theme is infection disease, including COVID-19 and nanotechnology. The aim is to support projects with close to basic research, and the targeted reality at the end of not be higher than 4. This is the funding agency that participate in this scheme. So I just want to mention that even though there are probably some of you who stay in Malaysia or Singapore, they not have funding agency representative here, but you can still join the consortium as a partner. For the project coordinator should be researcher that supported directly with the funding agency listed here. And for the sixth innovation call, this is will be ended in the 15th January next year. The thematic is digital health, including infection disease and bioeconomy. The 3R at least 3. So this is applied. And this is the, you can see the funding agency that, involved in the innovation call. So if you ask me about what is the expected by of the research by funder in Indonesia, most of the funder in Indonesia, like Minister of Research and Technology, probably Pak Oki next week can explain more detail. We are concerned about the, of course, the scientific excellence, like publication, IPR, and so on. And also, if they are already in the status of the applied research, then of course we expected that the research can also go to the economic value, can show the economic value, and finally, of course, the social impact. So, three of that becoming most of our desire or our expected from the all of the research that we support. While if the Minister of Research and Technology cover almost more category of research, but for LPDP, they focus on downstream. There are also new funding agency, but they are very specific. The name is, this is about the palm oil research. So they are new, the same under the Minister of Finance. They are only focused in the palm oil research, and also, the total research budget is still small. But anyway, they are already exist in Indonesia, and they support some, not so many, research in palm oil. And DP, we hope that we can be focused on the basic research. Of course, if the government concerned with basic research, because I didn't see yet that kind of trend, but we optimistic that in the near future, the government should also focus, invest in the basic research. I think that's all that I can share with you. That I will get if we can discuss more in discussion.
Yes. Terima kasih banyak Pak Teguh Rahardjo untuk pemaparannya. Very warm thank you for you to kindly let us know about many different kind of grants that are now ongoing. So Krista, in fact, that DP has a lot of schemes, international cooperation funding schemes like the one described here. So hopefully, as a result of this meeting, a new program or new scheme also can be created. And as part of the main objective also on this seminar, not only we want to gather all of the researchers from all over the world, you can also get to know other researchers. There are several scientists here, in fact, that has an affiliation abroad that you could invite to be your partner and apply for a joint call. Okay, so before we move on to the main session, I would like to ask you to turn on your camera, because it's quite rare to have all of us here today. So hopefully Please turn on your camera, Pak Teguh Rahardjo. Mungkin bisa foto bersama sebentar, Bapak. Ya. Oke, kita akan mengambil foto bersama. Untuk yang kameranya belum dinyalakan, bisa untuk dinyalakan sebentar. Sudah dandan yang cantik? Baik. Oke, akan diambil beberapa shot foto ya. Sudah siap, admin? Oke, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Oke, thank you very much. Sudah, admin? Sudah diambil fotonya? Siap. Terima kasih banyak. Okay, thank you very much. Now you can turn the video off again, so that if you would like. So now we're going to move to the main session after Pak Teguh has already kindly explained a little bit about how grant management, a little bit of grant overview in Indonesia, so that Krista will have an idea on what kind of grants are available and what are the open calls right now. So now we're going to move on to the main session. So before we start, I would like to introduce our speaker. So our speaker is a very good friend of mine, and we have a very long history of getting to know each other since I was still fresh from PhD, maybe just 3 years out. Yeah, Krista. Krista is in fact the mentor for early career researchers in the Metabolomics Society. So she was the designated mentor for Early Career Members Network, and I was the first president of that organization. And then we serve, both of us served together as a board of director for almost 5 years or 6 years, where Krista served as an officer also, and I was the chair for the conference committee. So we've known each other very, very long back in our involvement as a board of director of the Metabolomics Society, but I have never heard speak about a US grant management system. So usually we talk about the organization like Metabolomics. And now we're so fortunate because she's also the program director in NIH and NCI. So her research interest is in the metabolomics in population-based studies. And she's also the executive committee program officer for the COMETS, chair of NIH Metabolomics Society Interest Group, and member of the Human Health Exposure Analysis Resource. She has a very long portfolio as a program director in NIH and NCI. So without further ado, Krista, we would like to invite you to present your talk now. All the time is yours.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much for the invitation to share a little bit about 2 topics today. How to sort of write a grant from the perspective of the grant funder. And also we'll talk in the second talk about the US federal grant system. It's a little complicated, so that talk might be slightly longer, but it'll give you an idea of how we do funding in the United States. So I'm very happy to be here. I think it's a great way to start my weekend. It's bright and early on Saturday morning. And so I'm very excited to be here to be able to give this presentation. So as Saskia mentioned, I've been with the National Institutes of Health, and I'll explain a little bit about the National Institutes of Health because I think there's a lot of confusion about how that institute is set up. And we know this, so we always try to explain it. I've been with them for over 10 years. I work in the area of epidemiology with a focus in metabolomics. And my role there is to manage grants in addition to my research and other activities that I do, which are infrastructure and resource building for scientists. So this is a small part of what I do, but a critically important part. So I'm just going to get started. Hopefully it's going to move. Oh, there we go. So I'd just like to start with the whole premise. And this is one of our past deputy directors of the NIH. who stated, there is no grantsmanship that will turn a bad idea into a good one, but there are many ways to disguise a good one. So the idea for this talk is that I'm going to present how to show your good idea and make it a good grant application. The important things that you need to do are plan before you write. You have to think about things long before your grant application is due. You have to start very early. You have to know your timeline. You have to make sure to understand if your institution requires your grant to be submitted prior to when it's due to your funder. You want to think about identifying a project that fits with the overall professional goals that you have and your organizational purpose. So for example, if, you know, I kind of call it building your scientific brand. So I'm known for epidemiology, and I'm known for applying metabolomic technologies to epidemiology. So I would not go out and apply for a genomics or proteomics grant because it's not really matching my overall professional goals. And it may not then match my organizational purpose because I'm in my position to focus on metabolomics and epidemiology. So if I then apply for genomics, it's a little confusing. You want to assess your expertise, your resources, and your strengths to approach a project. So for example, as an epidemiologist, I may want to look at metabolite biomarkers for breast cancer. But if I only have access to a cohort that has prostate cancer cases and controls, it makes no sense for me to apply for the breast cancer grant. You have to think about also what types of resources you have. Another example is with, for example, epidemiologists, we generally don't have our own mass spectrometers. So we have to think about how are we going to get those samples assayed. So very important things to think about. Also, this is a big one. Be assured that your project has not been done before. So you have to take the time to do a literature search and do some scoping and investigating to determine what has been done and what has not been done. Because the worst thing is someone submitting a grant and the review panel looking at it and saying, well, we don't want to fund this because it's already been done. Or like a lot of times, I've seen this a lot recently in genomics. Why should we gather any more genomics information in, you know, cancer X? Because, you know, it's sort of, you know, if you're going to continue to collect it in cancer X, then you have to have a reason, and we already have so much genomic data in this cancer. And then you want to involve key collaborators in your planning. So this is very important because you may have expertise, like I may have key expertise in epidemiology and epidemiology study design. However, somebody may have, you know, somebody has better expertise in metabolomics. So I'm going to want, even though I've been doing a lot of metabolomics, it's from the perspective of where I use a contract research organization to then get my samples assayed. So I still need a metabolomics expert as a key collaborator in order to make that grant be attractive to a funder. Because if I'm the only one on it, as my expertise is epidemiologic study design, they are not going to understand how I'm going to have the true like analytical chemistry expertise that's needed. So you have to identify the appropriate funding agency for your project. So we'll talk a little more in the second talk about the NIH and funding agencies and what that looks like and how the NIH is set up and how that translates into grants. So I'm going to speak right now just from the perspective of a general funding agency, not necessarily from the perspective of the NIH, because I think that obviously you're getting your funding from different funders. So it's important to just think about any funder, not necessarily the NIH funder. That'll be more in the second talk when we get to that. So you have to review the funding agency's websites regarding your scientific goal. Most agencies post strategic plans, information about initiatives, and scientific areas of interest. You have to make sure that your scientific idea, your hypothesis, your specific aims align with the funding agency. Also, I think this varies possibly from country to country, and in the United States from agency to agency. But if there are agency contacts for a grant or a funding announcement, contact them if you are permitted. At the NIH, they do permit grantees to contact us. So I spend a lot of my time on the phone talking to grantees. They will send me their specific aims page. I will review it, and I'll talk to them about whether it's a good fit for the agency or a good fit for the division that I work in. And sometimes I can also look and kind of say, these aims aren't very strong. You need to come in with stronger aims. And I never tell the investigator how to change their aims or what they should do scientifically, because that's not my role. Whoever, the investigator that's bringing in the science, they are the expert. So I can explain to them why an aim is not strong and what they may need to do to get help. For example, I recently had someone contact me who was very strong in epidemiology, but not as strong in metabolomics. So I gave them a list of individuals who are very strong in metabolomics and very strong analytical chemists. And I recommended that they speak with these individuals while they're working on their specific aims so they can bring in a very strong grant. Also, you have to decide on the funding mechanism. Now here I do reference the NIH because this is our funding scheme we have. It's our research project program. They're called R grants. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the second session. But when people come in and ask me, is this appropriate for an R01? That is sort of our most commonly used grant. If they don't have enough preliminary data, for example, I would advise them to come in for an exploratory or developmental grant, which is our R21. So you really do need to have these discussions to assure that your aims are aligning with the agency's sort of perspective and what the agency is looking for, as well as if it aligns with the funding mechanism. This next point is very important. As you start to do your scoping and getting ready, you really need to immediately review the agency application submission and review procedures. Every agency has different procedures and different requirements, and you want to make sure that you understand those thoroughly before you come in with an application, because if you don't, you may miss really key components that are going to kind of put you a level above the other applicants. Also, I always recommend that people examine current and new funding opportunities. You can look at agency websites. A lot of agencies have newsletters and many of them use social media. We seem to use Twitter the most. I think that's kind of what people in professional organizations are using more now. And we have many Twitter accounts at the NIH where we kind of say what our funding announcements are. And also you want to look around and see, is there a weekly or a monthly agency announcement that I can sign up for? We have one that goes out every Friday afternoon between 3 and 3:30. And it lists all of our new initiatives and any pertinent announcements or any modifications to current initiatives. So it's very important for grantees to have that information, and it usually is made freely available. So I also just want to show you an example of one of our databases that we can use that people can use to find funding. It's very simple. It's the NIH grants and funding. You go in and right here, it just says find funding. So you can type in whatever you want. I decided to do a search for metabolomics. How much metabolomics research is currently being funded actively right now at the National Institutes of Health? And here we have 43 active grants. And this sort of displays them. And the top one is a new initiative focusing on brain cell census, which I'm not even 100% sure what that is. I would have to read the initiative, but there's a metabolomic component to this particular call for funding. So you can read through all of that and get a really good sense of your idea may fall under one of these special calls for funding. And there are also parent grants. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the second session with regard to specific NIH grants, but sometimes agencies just have an overall grant mechanism that you can apply for as an investigator initiated grant. And there's no real specific topic under that. It's just what you're interested in. And then there's sometimes these specific calls for something that is very science specific, like metabolomics, proteomics, genomics in autism, like very specific. So you really want to look and make sure whatever you're applying for, what those funding opportunities are. Now, you also want to know what has already been funded. So now you know what funding is available. You know what they're currently funding. You know what's new and coming out this week because you looked at the Friday announcement. But now you have to think, wait a second. Is my idea really novel and exciting, or has it already been funded in some way? How do you get that information? It's very important. So if you need to find a way to research already funded grants, and many agencies provide this information as publicly available. Now, the National Institutes of Health does because we're a federally funded organization and we are funded by United States taxpayer dollars. So we have to be very transparent with everything that we fund. So we make it very easy for people to research funded grants that will help identify scientific gaps. So the way that you might want to review a funder's research portfolio is to look and see what they have on their web pages as far as resources and databases. I'll give you another example of what we have. We call it Nih Reporter. And this is, it's our research portfolio online reporting tool. We direct many of our grantees here to do a quick search to determine what is being funded in the area in which they are interested in and where their aims lie. That way, they have the ability to look up their interests. Here, I did just a quick search for metabolomics, epidemiology, and breast cancer, if that's what I wanted to apply for. And there are 21 results matching that search criteria. So I can look down over the 21 projects that were funded to see if the National Institutes of Health is already funding my idea. And that's really absolutely critical, because it would be terrible because these grants you all know it takes so much time to develop your idea and to get that grant proposal in the format that whatever agency you're applying to wants it in. And if your idea is already being funded and you come to find out after all that work, somebody else had that really great idea too, but it was the last funding cycle and it got funded and they just beat me to it. And now I've spent all this time on this grant application that's already been funded. So very important to do that. So a few things you want to know before you sit down and start writing. You want to know where to find the instructions for writing your application. Look on their website, on the announcement. You also need to know what peer reviewers are looking for. And each agency has its own peer review scheme. So you really want to find on the funding agency's webpage or resources they provide to know how are they scoring you. What are peer reviewers asked to look for? That's what you want to address in your application. And I just mentioned application being scored. How are they scoring it? What are they looking at? At the end of the day, what do you get back as your score? How do you interpret it? These are things you want to know before you start to write, not when you're getting your review summaries back. You need to know this ahead of time because it positions you to write a much stronger application. You also want to know, are there any additional review criteria that you need to consider? Protection of human subjects, vertebrate animal policies. Are you using biohazards, and how do you have to account for that in your grant when you're writing it? Are there other things that you have to consider? And then are there other review considerations? So sometimes there are review criteria which the reviewers are actually scoring you on or checking a box and saying, yes, they meet this criteria, but there are also other considerations that could be considered. Does your application require a resource or data sharing plan? And if so, what should that look like? At the NIH, they ask at the end of every review session, is the budget appropriate for the application? And they'll say, yes, fund as is, or some people will say, no, they need to remove a year from the grant, or they need to reduce this aspect of the grant. And occasionally I've seen they should put more money into this aspect of it. So it's really, really interesting, but you need to understand everything they take into consideration so that you go in to writing that grant with the most knowledge that you have available to write a winning application. So proposal development. What is required in the proposal? You really need to understand what that proposal is going to require. So some of the proposal components that are common are just listed here. You should probably be familiar with these: abstract, background and significance. If it is a resubmission, response to reviewers, what are the specific aims, preliminary studies, or a progress report if it's a renewal, research plan, aspects of human subjects, data and safety monitoring plan if it's a clinical trial or there's a clinical component to it, the budget, and the bio sketches or institutional signatures. So these are all common things you would see in proposal development, but you really want to go back to that agency announcement and see what is required for that application. So here I've highlighted 4 very common, very important aspects of the grant application that I'm going to go into in a little more depth to explain what the funder looks for and what might help you write an application that is attractive to the peer review panel. So specific aims is probably one of the most important aspects of the application. These specific aims really need to tackle an important research question. The research question must be able to move the field forward. And that sounds like a big ask. It's a heavy lift. It's important, but you really need to start thinking, will the project I'm proposing really propel the field forward, and how? And that's what has to sort of come through in the significance and the specific aims and everything of the proposal. You want to avoid concepts that cannot be strongly supported with your own preliminary data or published data from laboratories. There are some grants that may ask you to do exploratory and developmental grants where you don't need a lot of preliminary data, but for a large, independent investigator initiated award, preliminary data is critical, or published data from other laboratories supporting your idea, because they don't want to invest a lot of money in an idea that we're not sure is going to be successful. You need to identify your central hypothesis. What is the whole hypothesis, or this probably isn't the best word, theme of your grant, and the hypothesis that falls under that theme. This is what anchors your specific aims to that common theme. It's common theme, what's the hypothesis, and then your specific aims under it that all link back to that central hypothesis that links back to your common theme. It should all link together. And your central hypothesis should be well-focused and testable by those specific aims. Now, this is a general rule of thumb that we use at the NIH. Other funders may be different. They may say you can only have 2 specific aims or something. And I've seen people go anywhere from 2 to 4 specific aims. But the goal is you want to limit your application to a few specific aims, and that prevents you from being overly ambitious. This is a common mistake that you want to avoid. So specific aims should be clearly written and easy to understand. They should reflect a proposed project that tackles an important problem in a significant field, which I mentioned earlier. They should be capable of generating new discoveries in the field. So if these aims are successful, the reviewers should be able to see how that's going to move in, how the success of those aims is going to take that science into sort of the next phase of discovery. They should reflect work that is new and unique, and they should be likely to exert a significant influence on the research field. So they have to be significant. You also want to make sure that your objectives can reasonably be achieved within the time frame of the grant. So they really do look at that. So if you have 5 specific aims and you're asking for a 5-year grant, that's not likely going to happen. Really, they're probably going to say, okay, 3 of these aims can be achieved in 5 years. So you want to start with a broad emphasis on the significance, and then you want to focus on generating experiments with very clear endpoints that reviewers can readily assess. So here's my significance and my theme. Here's my common hypothesis. Can these aims meet that? And can I see the clear endpoints of how we're going to get there? And then this is another really important thing. And I think this is something that I say to grantees more than anything else. Almost every call I have with a grantee, even very senior grantees, have you gotten an outside opinion for a fresh perspective? Do you have a colleague that has successfully been awarded funding from the NIH or the National Cancer Institute or whatever agency you're applying for? And I say that to more senior people whenever they're applying for a grant in a new area for them. And I say this to almost every early career scientist that I speak with. It's very important to get outside opinions. But what I will say though, those outside opinions should be from a trusted colleague, because you're going to let them read your best ideas. So be sure that whoever you're sharing that with is someone you truly trust, who is a true mentor or a good trusting colleague that you can have these discussions with. And now the next thing I want to talk about is your research plan. So your goal is to present a well-organized, visually appealing, and readable description of your proposed project. You want to view that research plan as a map. It's your roadmap that shows how you plan to test your hypothesis. So it needs to be clear. You need to lay out the experiments and expected outcomes very clearly. You have to convince reviewers that you will be successful and minimize any doubts that you will not be able to conduct that proposed research. You want to keep the reviewer's eyes on the ball. If it's a key point, repeat it and repeat it again. If you say it in the significance and background, you can say it again in the specific aims page. You can say it in the abstract. You can say it in your research plan. Just repeat it to drill it home. Your research plan should answer 3 basic questions. Can your research move the field forward? I think you're hearing a theme here. This is very important. Is the field important? Will progress make a difference in your research field? And can your team carry out the work? So not only is the research important, is the field important, but have you assembled a team that can actually carry this work out? And then you want to create opportunities to drive those key points home. And I just mentioned this. You want to emphasize the project's importance, the team's expertise throughout the research plan, not just in the significance section and bio sketches. You want to keep driving that point home. And also you can add more emphasis by putting it text in bold or bold italics. They say don't underline because underlining is sort of from the era of the typewriter and it's outdated. So if you want to emphasize, use bold or bold italics. And then describe the strengths and limitations of the study. You really should say how the limitations will be addressed because reviewers do look for that because every project you put forward is going to have some sort of limitation. So when those limitations arise, how will they be addressed? Now, the abstract is the most often read section of the grant application. It should address the project's broad, long-term objectives and specific aims and include a description of the research design and methods for achieving the stated goals. So the summary, it should be a summary of the proposal and it includes some basic components, the background, the rationale for the project, the aims and objectives, the approach and methods, and implications for anticipated results of the contribution to science. And just as sort of a rule of thumb or a footnote, NIH grants limit the abstracts to 30 lines. That's actually quite a bit you can write in the abstracts for the NIH. So you can say a lot in the abstract. And everybody goes to two places, the abstract and the specific aims. The abstract is very important as well. And the other thing I recommend is write the abstract after completing the body of your proposal because you want to, or if you've already written it, rewrite it at that point because you want to capture what's actually in that proposal versus what you thought was going to be in that proposal when you started writing it. The other important aspect is the budget and justification. You do not want to significantly over or under budget. The budget request is used to gauge your understanding of the project's cost and what is needed to accomplish the specific aims. So if you've really under budgeted, they're going to wonder, do they not understand how much work they have to do? And if you over budget, they're going to say, are they trying to pad their budget and they're going to use this for something else? And we look at that a lot, like this budget's a little too big for this work. Do they understand that? You also have to anticipate salary and operating increases for future years. You want to provide an adequate description of the expenses. The number of times I look at a budget justification and I have no idea how they're justifying expenses. You know, if I had a nickel for every time that happened, I would probably be sitting on a mound of money. So you have to provide a clear justification for the expenses in each project period of the grant so that people can understand how your expenses are for the entire project. Personnel is another important part that goes in with budget justification because a lot of what you're justifying in that budget are personnel costs. So you want to justify all the expertise for the personnel. I always get reviewers that come back and say, they have a lot of personnel on here and it's really expensive, but I can't figure out what these people are actually doing. Why are they on here? And you never want to have that question come up. It needs to be very clear. Never use to be determined for key personnel. There are key personnel, co-investigators. So if I'm the epidemiologist and I need a metabolomics person, I can't say to be determined. I have to say person X is my metabolomics expert. But if later on I'm going to hire a postdoc, I can say we'll figure that out later. Anticipate salary increases for future years. Include travel costs to present your findings at conferences because it's expected that you share your findings. Use existing and shared resources as a value. So with an epidemiology study, we're usually encouraged if someone uses existing data to save money. That's always a plus. So the most frequent problems reviewers cite when they critique grant applications, this is directly from the National Institutes of Health, our Center for Scientific Review. And I'm just sort of going to run through these so you can kind of get an idea. And this is from the reviewer's perspective. This is what they see that is problematic. Lack of original ideas, absence of an acceptable scientific rationale, lack of experience in the essential methodology, and we've talked a lot about that, questionable reasoning in the experimental approach. Your experimental approach has to make sense. An uncritical approach. So your approach is like, everything's great, we're going to do it this way, it's going to work, no problem. No suggestion as if this may not work, this is our alternative plan. you have to, you want to make them believe you've thought of everything so that the success of this project is guaranteed. A diffuse, superficial, or unfocused research plan. Lack of sufficient methodological detail. This one I see a lot. I'm always talking to investigators about fixing their methodological detail. This is one that comes up, probably one of the most frequent comments throughout the approach. Lack of knowledge for published relevant work. We also discussed that when we talked about scoping. And then an unrealistically large amount of work. We talked about that when we said, keep your aims to a reasonable amount so you're not overly ambitious. And then uncertainty concerning future directions. That should be clear also. So a couple things I want to quickly say as we're wrapping up. Critiques are not personal. They're not a personal attack. Everybody who writes these, your heart and soul is in that project. And when you get a difficult critique back, it's upsetting sometimes, but it's not personal. And then sometimes when you get bad reviews, sometimes you're going to get a bad review, but there's often wisdom in harsh critiques. So take that wisdom and make your grant better. So just to wrap up, a few quick writing tips. Make your project goals realistic. Be organized and logical. Follow the suggested organization of the application, because the reviewers get many applications. They know where to go to find something. If it's not there, they're going to be frustrated, and then they're going to start finding other stuff. Write in a clear, concise language. It has to be easy to read and well written. Edit yourself, but if you have the opportunity to have someone else read it and edit, do that, because you don't want to have typos or formatting issues. And share your applications for comments with trusted colleagues. So finally, keys to success are to find collaborators and mentors who are experienced in writing successful grants to help guide you. Contact the agency scientific staff at appropriate stages of the review and award cycle. And educate yourself about the peer review process, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Krista. Really, really wonderful and super comprehensive. I learned a lot also. And I think your talk goes beyond like epidemiology field, and also not only relevant to the fundings for the US, but it's very general. And I think this kind of lesson learned is very important for us, Indonesian researchers, wherever we are. We have people joining from Asia, from United States, Canada, now in different countries like Switzerland, also even present. And I think it's very interesting to have this kind of wisdom from the perspective of grant funding, grant funder, I mean. So we are now opening the question and answer session. So if you have any questions, you could type it in the chat, or if you would like to ask, you can use the feature of raise hand and I can unmute you. Is there any question from the audience? Okay, I see someone who's raising their own hand. Okay, so please, Pak Adrian Pramono.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Very interesting talk from Dr. Teguh Rahardjo and Dr. Zanetti. So my name is Adrian Pramono. I'm from Diponegoro University, and my research focus on obesity, metabolic inter-organ crosstalk, and also nutrition interventions, as I am a registered nutrition. And I have a question for Dr. Zanetti. So up to now, Indonesia has no prospective cohort population-based study, which I think this is this big country should have it. And to conduct this type of study, we need a lot of funding, a lot of money. And as described by Dr. Teguh, I think there is no allocation for the topic of related to my interest. So I'm thinking about to start from with small of money, small of funding. So what do you think if we start a kind of prospective cohort population based study, and we can store, or we can collect the blood samples, we can store them. So, and then we perhaps we could analyze in the future. So what do you think, or what you suggest if we start with quite limited funding?
So the last part was how you might get funding. Was that the last sentence I just missed?
If we have limited funding, how we can?
Yeah. Just to start, because as a junior, mid junior researcher, it's not that easy to get that big funding.
No, it's not, and it's not in the United States either. This is not a problem isolated to Indonesia, although I can appreciate why you would want an Indonesian specific cohort, especially for nutrition and obesity. By the way, my PhD is in nutrition, even though I do epidemiology now. So I thought I would share that with you so I can empathize really with what you're faced with. And these do cost a lot of money, and we aren't really funding cohorts as much as we used to back in the the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s. So a couple of things that might be possible. You can collect samples and store them. There's no problem with that. Now the storage costs money as well, so that needs factored in. And you have to think about, though, if you're recruiting over time, especially with various factors, how that's affect those things, especially things like metabolic factors, which obviously you're interested in. If you collect 100 in 2020, 100 in 2021, and as you keep going, there could be some biases. There could be some biases in the data. However, one thing I can possibly recommend that may help you get started is there are groups of individuals who work together in these areas who may be willing to provide you with existing data. Now, they may not be in Indonesian populations, but it would give you a start. We have many cohorts with other populations like Japanese. We have many in China. We have many in the US and many in Europe. Although that may not directly address what you want it to address, it can help you maybe find the preliminary data that you need to help kind of show agencies that may want to invest in this. And recently, Japan in the Yamagata prefecture, and I hope I say this right, Sastia Soroka, if I got it right, they just did a very big metabolic study focusing on metabolomics where it was federally funded, and they assayed 10,000 people. And those data are now freely available to Japanese researchers, and there is value in that, and you may be able to sort of show that. If you want to get my contact information, and I should have put it on my slides, and I apologize for that. It just slipped my mind. If you want to contact Sastia after, there's a couple of cohorts and ideas I have that I'd be happy to connect you with individuals to help you kind of figure this out, especially since it's obesity, nutrition, and sort of metabolism, given that we work in metabolomics, if that would be helpful.
So I will put your email address in your slide, Krista, before we send it to all of the registered participants. Yes.
Thank you.
So,
terima kasih.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you so much, Krista. That will be very helpful for Adrian here to get.
We love epidemiologists love to collaborate.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for the question. Now we have a question from Professor Oki Karnarajasa. So Professor Oki is a very special person for us in Formine Institute because just before last month, he was appointed as a deputy in Indonesian Institute of Sciences. It's like a very, very big institute in Indonesia for.
Oh, congratulations.
But before that, he was the director for the capacity building and the grant management of our Ministry of Research and Technology. And he's actually our main supporter when we first initiated this world-class scientist series. So Prof. Oki has a question. Would you like to ask directly, Prof?
Okay, thank you, Bu Sastia. Hello, Krista. Nice meeting you. My name is Oki. I would like to ask you three different questions. Number one, what do you think, in your opinion, about the effectiveness of pre-proposal instead of submitting full proposal? That's number one. Number two is, what is the success rate of the proposal funded by NIH? And the third one is, how do you assign the reviewer for reviewing the proposal? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay. So the effectiveness of pre-proposal, it depends. We only require sort of a pre-proposal application if your grants are over $500,000 a year in any given year. Now that I would actually need to get the data and really dig into it, and I don't have it, but I don't know that I have seen any true overt differences between those that have given a pre-proposal for those large awards versus individuals who may be just applying at a grant that is $499,999 and they didn't have to do the pre-approval. However, there may be data on that our division has looked at, but from my personal viewpoint, I haven't seen it make a dramatic difference. And the other thing too is at the NIH, so we are evaluating it for the science and we're evaluating it for the budget. But the other thing you have to remember, I'm not evaluating it when it comes in for peer review. So my opinion doesn't really matter. I can say, great, let's bring this in. But what matters is what your peers think. And that may go peer review and the peer review panel doesn't find it as exciting as I do. So that's one thing. And we also, our big project program grants come in as pre-application. And because those are so large and complicated, sometimes they don't do so well in review. So I hope I answered that. Now the success rate of NIH, of course, I don't have those numbers because the NIH is 27 centers and institutes. However, I am happy to get that information to you. And I know those slides are out there. So I'm happy to dig those slides up and provide them to you after the webinar today. And I hope Sastia can give me your contact information because I know that we report on that and it's very, very detailed. And how do we assign reviewers? So the reviewers are nominated and it goes through, and I won't go into too much depth about this in the second presentation, but in a general sense, we have the NIH Center for Scientific Review, and they are separate from what I do. And they assign the reviewers to the panels, and people are nominated. And I can nominate people. Sometimes they'll, you know what, we're getting a lot of, this happened about 6-7 years. You know what, we're getting a lot of metabolomics grants in all of a sudden, and there's not a lot of people with metabolomics expertise. Can you just give us a general list? So I give them a general list and they decide who they put on the panel. And that's sort of, it's up to the people who specialize in that. So I hope I've answered your questions.
Yeah, just for your information, and when I was the director for research grant, I have an open call for merit-based selection for the reviewer. That's why we are at the moment have like a 350 national reviewer, because every year we have like 23,000 proposals per year, and that's for the research proposal. On the other hand, we have another like 15,000 community empowerment program proposal. So that is why we use the open call, and normally once they will be selected, then we will have a certain period that they will be used or eligible for reviewing. And then we will again open another call for a reviewer. That's what we have done here. Thank you.
Very interesting. That's a lot of reviewers.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So very nice first session we had, and excellent questions too. One is relevant to the funder perspective, and also Pak Oki used to operate very huge funding from the ministry, Pak ya. And he in fact gave an opening talk when I think Professor Takano and Jessica Laskisu, which is a very close friend of Crystal. So Pak Oki met her. And Pak Teguh, I just would like to confirm terkait dengan funding yang tadi Bapak sampaikan. Bapak menyampaikan bahwa walaupun anggota konsorsiumnya itu project leadernya harus ada di dalam list, tapi sebagai mitra bisa ya Pak ya di luar dari negara yang disampaikan di skema EU SEA tadi.
Ya, bisa.
Oh ya, baik. Terima kasih banyak Pak Teguh. Jadi rekan-rekan di sini juga we can open bigger consortium ya Pak ya, at least 2+1 in the EU and SEA grant call. But other than the countries listed, it's also possible to participate as a collaborative partner. Yeah, so okay. So I would like to now move to the second session. So thank you so much, Krista and Pak Teguh, and also for those who ask questions, Pak Oki and Pak Adrian. Now we would like to invite Krista to deliver her talk, the second talk. Krista, you good?
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and pull this off my off my desktop, and then free share. Nobody desktop.
So,
give me 1 second.
The first session is about how we as a researcher can learn how to get successful grants. As you know, a very important part of being a researcher is have to continuously write grants and write a publication. And writing a publication require us to have funding. So it's like cycle ya, life cycle yang nggak pernah berhenti ya, harus terus ya, dua-duanya harus berjalan beriringan. Without a solid publication track record, maybe then we cannot get successful funding. Without successful funding, we cannot write the next paper. So both has to be done in parallel always.
I think this is it. Give me 1 second. I think I pulled up an old one. Give me 1 sec. My apologies.
So for the next session, we would like to learn more about how grant management is operated. And then we will have a discussion with Pak Teguh, Bu Krista, dan juga Pak Taiful nanti tentang grant. Dan ini free discussion ya, jadi nanti kita akan buka untuk diskusi yang lebih hangat di antara peserta-peserta yang hadir di sini.
Okay, 1 second. I thought I changed the date on this, so just overlook my error when I share this. It was late last night, so it's definitely October 24th, 2020. So my apologies for that. So I'm going to be speaking now about the National Institutes of Health grants process. Okay, so a quick outline. This will really delve into how the federal government of the United States funds biomedical researchers. So I want to do a quick outline of the National Institutes of Health, the grants process overview, the types of grants we fund, our receipt and referral process, our scientific review and study sections, how we award funding, and then how we manage the grants. So very quickly, as I mentioned, the National Institutes of Health is the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world. Oh, my apologies. What did I just do? Sorry. Oh, sorry about that. And we have 27 institutes or centers. And I've highlighted them here in red. So this is 27 plus our Office of the Director. These go from very large institutes to very small institutes. So the National Cancer Institute, where I work, is the largest of the institutes. It has a budget of $6.44 billion for this fiscal year and thousands of employees. However, the National Institute on Nursing Research is much smaller, and maybe it has just over 100 employees and a budget of 140 million this fiscal year. So as you can see, these institutes range from small to quite large, depending on their mission. I am just gonna, I don't know why that keeps happening, okay. And so moving on, I apologize. This was going so smoothly up until now. Okay. So each institute sets a specific research agenda, often focusing on a particular disease or body system. So I work for the National Cancer Institute. There are other examples of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the National Institute of Aging, and then the various other ones. As I mentioned, I work for the National Cancer Institute. So that is our mission is to lead, conduct, and support cancer research across the nation to advance scientific knowledge and help all people live longer, healthier lives. And each institute has their own mission. So this is a typical institute or center at the National Institutes of Health. And it is set up, so it's set up with an office of the director. It has a National Advisory Council, which are investigators from around the country that assist in advising on the extramural programs on this side. And what I mean by extramural programs are these are programs that are used to fund universities and businesses throughout the United States and the world. We do permit we call them foreign components to our grants. So if you are collaborating with the United States investigator, a domestic US investigator, and you are part of their grant, we do send money to foreign institutions. And so we fund everything outside of the NIH, and those are grants and contracts. And this is our advisory board. They assist us with grants, grant review and recommendations. They also comment on our progress, our activities, and our future directions. On this side, we have the Board of Scientific Counselors. That they help oversee our intramural programs. These are the research we perform at the NIH. So not only are we a funder, but we're also doing biomedical research on site. So for example, I don't know if you've been following the United States COVID-19 pandemic, but many of you may be familiar with Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is our lead infectious disease expert in the United States. Dr. Fauci is at one of our institutes and he has his own laboratory there. So he performs research at the NIH and we're very excited to have him. He's fantastic. So we have then those are the laboratory and clinical studies that take place at the NIH. Now, the Board of Scientific Counselors, you're probably thinking, this is great. These people don't have to write grants. Well, it's not all that rosy because this Board of Scientific Counselors every 4 years comes into an individual's laboratory. And these are outside investigators from universities and your peers. They come in and they evaluate your performance and productivity through this periodic review, and it's taken very seriously. So moving on to the grants process overview. I'm going to take you through this sort of scheme. This is the outline of what we're going to go through. And we've already talked about planning your grant and finding your opportunity. So I won't touch much on that, but I am going to talk about how to apply, the receipt and referral of your application, the review of your application, how the award is made, and then how it's managed, and what we expect for you to share results. So first, we're going to focus briefly again on the plan and finding the opportunity, and this will just be very brief. So how do you find an opportunity at the NIH? Well, I talked so much about on the last talk how very important it was to find funding opportunities, know what you're applying for, understanding the application. So we have a few types of funding opportunity announcements. One is called a program announcement. This identifies areas of increased priority and emphasis on a specific area of science. So I may say, I really want to see some more grants. We do our research, we figure out where there's a gap in the portfolio, and we say, okay, maybe there's a gap for metabolomics and autism research. I'm just throwing things out. So we write up a PA and we say, we really want more grants to come in on that area. And then people know, oh, they're interested in that, let's bring these in. Now there's no set aside money for these, it's just a call for interest. Now, there's also the request for applications. This is where we identify a more narrowly focused or narrowly defined area for which money has been set aside for awards. So this is where we take a pot of money and we say, you are applying for this very well-defined, very specific thing. And if you are awarded, this is how much money is available. And they also assemble a very specific review group for that. For example, quickly, there was recently in the field of metabolomics where I work, an initiative where we made a very specific call for compound identification cores and data analysis and interpretation tools for metabolomics. So we funded 7 cooperative agreements under that call, and there was money set aside for just that. We also have requests for proposals. Now this is calls for contract proposals. Now I won't talk much about contract proposals because quite frankly, that is a whole nother hour talk on its own, because contracts are very different from grants and usually small businesses apply to those and various other things. However, we do fund small businesses and some large businesses through contracts. So we'll move on to types of grants. The R01 is a research project grant. This is our most commonly used grant. It is our traditional investigator-initiated grant, providing support for very discrete specified research. So if you have a really great idea and you want to apply and you can't find a specific funding announcement, we call this a parent announcement. You go to our just R01 announcement and you can submit any idea that you like under this announcement. If you think it's important and it's really going to be exciting, you apply. I mentioned earlier when I got a question from the last talk about that if any year of your grant is over $500,000, you need to request NIH approval to submit that application. It's called it's like awaiting receipt of award. And I actually get a lot of these because I'm in the field of epidemiology. So I'm writing justifications for large, we call them large R01s, almost every funding cycle. Now the funding for the R01 is up to 5 years. It's usually from 3 to 5 years. I just recently had a grant come through that was 3 years. I've had a couple of grants that are 4, but the majority of them end up being 5. You're allowed to have 2 submissions. So you have an initial submission. If it doesn't get funded, then you can have an amended or revised application that comes in. However, we have recently changed our policy, well, not recently, probably in the last 5 years, I think, where you can do initial and amended, but then if it doesn't get funded in the amended announcement, you can bring it in again as a new initial grant. So you technically could do initial amended, initial amended, initial amended, and keep going. But at some point, you're going to have to stop if it doesn't get funded. But I actually usually advise people if they don't get funded after the amendment, the amended, and if it is a good grant, sometimes it does take 3 tries. So I've had people come in as a new initial and get funded. And the amended application allows the applicant to address reviewer comments. Now the R01 is renewable, so you can do first 5 years and come in competitively to try to get it renewed for a second 5 years or a third 5 years and so on. The R21 is another grant that we use often. It encourages new and exploratory developmental research projects, and it provides support for early and conceptual stages of project development. So the scope of these are really exploratory novel studies, high risk, high reward studies, and the projects should really be distinct from those supported through a traditional R01 mechanism. These have a tendency to have less preliminary data, where the R01, you really need to come in with a very good amount and strong preliminary data, as I mentioned, the importance of that in my previous talk. These these R21 exploratory developmental grants provide up to $275,000 for 2 years. These, again, you're allowed the 2 submissions, initial, amended, but you can bring it back in for another initial if you want. These are not renewable. So if you get an R21, you get it for 2 years, and you cannot then compete for a second 2 years. We also have what we call small research grants, because everything is not necessarily a big project. These are short-term awards. The scope for these is pilot and feasibility studies, collection of preliminary data, secondary analysis of existing data, small self-contained research projects, and development of new research technology. Being in the field that I'm in, I mostly see collection of preliminary data, which is important if you want to apply for an R01. And I also see a lot of secondary analysis of existing data, because in our field, there's so much existing data that sometimes you don't need an R01 to meet your research goals. These are less than $50,000 per year with a 2-year maximum. And again, the same, 2 submissions, initial and amended. These, similar to the R21, are not renewable. I'm going to mention a couple of we have so many mechanisms, so I can't cover all of them, but I am going to mention 2 of the less common mechanisms that come in. And I alluded to this one on the last, during the last question and answer. We have PO1s, and there is a whole series of P awards. The most common is the PO1. These are research program projects. These differ from R01s because they're integrated, multi-project research approaches involving multiple independent investigators who share knowledge and common resources. So each project contributes to a common theme, and the projects have shared, well-defined research program goal. So as an example, if you wanted to do omics discovery in a specific cancer, you may submit a grant where you have a metabolomics core, a genomics project, a proteomics, so a metabolomics project, a proteomics project, and a genomics project, for example. And then you may have a data analysis core. So you have these 4 components. Each one of them has its own funded principal investigator, and they all come in as one grant and work together. This is one of the ones I mentioned last time that would require sort of a pre-application or a pre-approval to come in. Now, we also have cooperative agreements. These are, the grant part of it doesn't really change that much. So these are discrete, specified, circumscribed projects performed by the named investigators in an area representing their specific interests and competencies. So a U01 is similar to an R01. However, the difference is there is substantial programmatic involvement between the NIH staff and the award recipient. So for example, I have several cooperative agreements in an area of data analysis and interpretation tools for metabolomics. I attend all of the grantee meetings. I help the grantees set their agendas. And we also have another program officer who is assigned as a project scientist, and he is able to participate in the scientific aspects of their grant. So he helps them if they want to write a best practices paper, he can actually participate in that best practices paper and be an author. Because I focus on the grant management of those, I'm not permitted to publish with them, but I am permitted to be involved at a much higher level of advisement than I would be for just a grant mechanism. And we do have a lot of UO1s at the NIH. We also have conference grants. These provide support for high quality conferences and scientific meetings relevant to the NIH mission. This is another one where prior approval is required before submission. And the application budgets are not limited, but they do need to reflect the actual needs of the proposed project or the proposed meeting. And funding can be up to 5 years. Honestly, these particular grants are a little bit harder to get because they're just, we have limited funds in the R13 pool, but people do apply, and I have seen these grants be awarded. Oh, in fact, I think Sasti, if I'm not mistaken, for the Burlingame meeting, our Metabolomics Society Burlingame meeting, you all assisted Oliver Feen in writing an R13 conference grant to support that meeting from the perspective of supporting early career members to attend and have activities at that meeting, and that one was funded.
Yes.
Yeah, so I remember that. I was not the
grant.
Yes. So I remember that was funded. I was not the program officer on that grant because it's a conflict of interest for me, but I do know that it was funded. So these grants are not easy to get. So congratulations on being successful, because they're not easy to get. So that's really, so just wanted to mention that. And we also have career development awards. Now we have so many career development awards. We have many series. I'm going to highlight the series that I think is most important, probably for this audience. If there are undergraduates and various pre-doctoral individuals that would be interested, Sastia, I can provide the information for those grants after the webinar. So K awards are career development. There are a series of awards. They address basic science, they address clinical science. There's some are mentored, some are mid-career for career transition. They provide individual and institutional research training opportunities for trainees at the undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral levels. Then we have 2 other series, F and T, that provide different types of training awards as well. But of the K series, there's a list. The K series list is very long. I mean, we're talking probably 10 to 15. But the one that I want to bring up that is a newer award that I think has been very well received and used by many, and I have several of the ROOs in my portfolio. It's called a K99 ROO. We call them kangaroos. I have no idea how it got that nickname, but this is an NIH Pathway to Independence Award. And it's it was implemented when I was actually a postdoc, so probably 12 years ago. But this is to support both an initial mentored research experience for 2 years. And then it's followed by an independent research for a highly qualified postdoctoral researchers to secure an independent research position. So in the last 3 years, you move on to your first, academic position with funding. And then we expect the individuals who have received this award to successfully complete for an independent RO1 during the ROO phase. I think I have 2 or 3 of these in my portfolio right now, and it's a really impressive group of investigators. So I want to move on to the apply and receive and receipt. This will be rather quick, and this is a little bit, looks busy, but I'm going to try to take you through it. I hope you can all see my little arrow there. So this all takes place in the Center for Scientific, the first part of this, the receipt and referral take place in our Center for Scientific Review. They refer the application to the institute or division. So here you'll see grant submission deadlines, and this is just for the RO1 and UO1 because those were our most common grants. I'm going to focus on the February 5th deadline. We have 3 cycles a year. The deadlines are the February 5th, June 5th, and October 5th. And so I'd mentioned a couple of times, if your grant is over $500,000 in any one year, you have to submit what we call an ARA, awaiting receipt of award. So for cycle 1, with the February 5th date, you have to submit your ARA 6 to 8 weeks early for us to pre-review it and approve that submission. If you're coming in under $500,000, you submit February 5th. And so from January to about April is the receipt for the grants. Then the Center for Scientific Review refers them out to an institute or a program and a program officer. So I know at this point if I got your grant. And then from like May to August, which is about a 4-month period, they go under review, and I will talk about review in depth in a moment. And then they go to council. And I mentioned the extramural community has the National Advisory, Scientific Advisory Councils. Once the grants go through and they get good scores and we say, hey, I think we want to fund this one, the council reviews them and gives a recommendation for approval. Then about a year after you applied, if your grant gets a good score, you receive your award. So, and we have these 3 cycles. I don't need to go over all 3 of them, but that's generally how the receipt and referral work. And also, just as I mentioned, the submission dates differ depending on the funding opportunity announcement. So you just have to, we make sure everybody confirms those dates. So moving on to reviewing the application and making the award. This is our peer review cycle. This happens again at the Center for Scientific Review. So our principal investigator initiates a research idea. He or she submits an application to the National Institutes of Health. Within the National Institutes of Health, these grants, as I just mentioned, are received by the Center for Scientific Review, and they are referred out to a division, an institute, a division, a program officer who will manage the grant. And it is also assigned to a study section. We also call them IRGs, but I'm going to use the term study section because that's just simpler. And then the study section, which I'll talk about how that works in a moment, reviews the grant for scientific merit. Then if it's, whether it's funded or not, whether it's fundable or not, the institute gets it and can review the scores and determine for those that are scored meritoriously, we evaluate them for relevance. Then it goes to our advisory councils, which action is recommended, and then our institute director takes final action. So that's what the process looks like. So when it gets over to the Center for Scientific Review, it is assigned to a scientific review officer. They are my, so I'm the program officer, I'm the grants management person. They are my sort of equivalent or peer within the review process. And they decide which study section will review the grant application. They assign the reviewers from the pool of reviewers. They organize and conduct a fair and impartial review, and they generate a summary statement. Now, program officers and program staff usually attend the reviews, but we are not permitted to speak. We are only permitted to listen, as we cannot influence the how the review session is conducted. So reviewers receive the applications about 6 weeks before the study section meeting. It is each grant is assigned to 3 or more reviewers, and at least 2 of them have to provide full written critiques. The reviewers then confidentially submit their preliminary critiques, and these preliminary scores for each review, their preliminary scores for each review criterion, which I will get to in a moment, and then an overall impact of the application. The SRO uses those preliminary overall impact scores to generate a preliminary list of applications to be discussed. And then the review order of the discussed applications is random. So during the meeting, what happens at the actual study section meeting? These groups usually convene for 1 to 2 days, depending on the number of grant submissions. One member of that study section serves as the chair and conducts the meeting with the scientific review officer. The assigned reviewers, which there generally are 3, but I've seen up to 4 or 5, depending on what the request for application requires. The assigned reviewers present their evaluations and they read any mail reviews, and they go in the order of primary reviewer, secondary reviewer, and tertiary reviewer. They address 5 key areas in their review. Significance. So how significant is the research? How significant will the impact be? Will it move the field forward? Approach. This looks at the methods and analysis. This needs to be very solid. This is where I see the most comments most of the time on reviews, but also this is the easiest one to address because you can address an approach. You might be able to get more samples. You might be able to choose a different model system. You may be able to clarify some of your analyses, But if they say that your research isn't significant, that's much harder to address. They evaluate innovation. So are the methods innovative, or is it innovative research questions? So like 8 or 9 years ago, if somebody submitted a metabolomics grant, it was innovative technology. It's not innovative technology anymore, but you can apply that technology to an innovative question. So they look for that type of stuff. They evaluate you as an investigator. Do you have the qualifications and expertise needed for the specific aims you've outlined? And also, if you have a team of investigators that you're claiming you're going to work together, historically, have you worked together? And can you show that you've worked well together? And then the environment. They look to see if you have adequate support and resources at your institution. So this is what the Criterion score looks like. The scores go from 1 to 9, lower being a better score. So you always want to get a 1 or a 2. You don't want to be up here at the 8 or 9. They consider 5 average. And then there are these other things that are the other designations that are I'm not going to go into many of them because honestly, they're not used very frequently. The 2 that we see used the most are conflict of interest. So if somebody should submit an application from Harvard and you're on the review panel and your institution is Harvard, you have a conflict of interest and you have to step out of the room during that review. The other one that we see often is not discussed. So after they do the preliminary scores, they make a list. And because there are so many applications coming into the NIH, they only usually discuss the top 50% of the applications reviewed. And it requires unanimous consent. So if they say these top 50% aren't going to be reviewed, before the meeting starts, they ask all the reviewers in the room, are there any of these lower 50% that you want to pull off of that list to review? Many times, no, but often, yes, they'll say, grant number, blah, 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 by investigator, investigator X, we want that to be discussed. We want to pull it off the not discussed list. Now, if it's on the not discussed list, it doesn't mean there's no scientific merit. It just means that maybe you need to tidy your grant up and you can resubmit. And I've had investigators have a not discussed, call me and say, what do I do? And I say, can you address every issue in the review? Because they still get a written review. They just don't get the live review where comments are made around the review committee, but they get a written review from the primary, secondary, and tertiary reviewer. So I will say to them, can you address those comments? And if you can address them, you should resubmit. And I have had, it's rare, but it happens. I have actually had people go from not discussed in one cycle to the revised, amended on application to being funded. So the percentile rank. What happens to we rank the impact scores assigned by a peer review committee. So we normally calculate that by ordering the impact score. So you have the criterion and you have the impact score. And you calculate that by ordering the impact score of a particular application against the impact scores of all applications over the last year. Why do we do that? It permits a comparison across committees that may have had different scoring behaviors. So whenever we're deciding what to fund, my grants may have gone to study section A, and in the same program, my colleague, theirs might have gone to study section B. But we have to have an equivalent for what that 5% means. And if they don't do some sort of weighing or fixing or correcting for within committee bias, you can't compare the 5% to the 5% across 2 different study sections. So a rank of the 5th percentile is considered more meritorious than 95% of the applications reviewed by that committee. And also, not all research project grants are percentile. If it's a request for application, those don't get a percentile. We just use the actual impact score as a direct indicator of the review committee's assessment. I know it gets really complicated. Nothing can be easy. Moving on to the summary statement. So after you've gone through your review, you get everybody's reviewed your grant, they figured out your score, you get it all in a summary statement. Once the applications are reviewed, all the results are documented by the scientific review officer in this statement. It's forwarded to the applicant and the applicant's institution, and it should be available 30 days after the review. What is contained in that statement is an overall summary of the review discussion, the impact score and percentile ranking, your individual critiques from reviewer 1, 2, and 3, and these are essentially unedited. They write it and that's what you get. Budget recommendations and various administrative notes. So that might be something on resource sharing plans, for example, in your administrative notes. So now we're past the review, you've gotten your summary statement. What happens next? The assigned institute or center at the NIH takes charge of the grant. This is where it moves from the review and the scientific review officer to the institute and the program officer. The program officer is the main point of contact, and we help the applicant interpret review results, and if they are not funded, we give them guidance in preparing a resubmission. Then if you do receive a fundable score, it goes to a secondary level of review, and that's the advisory council that I mentioned. They consider the study section's recommendations, and they determine the relevance of the research to the institute's priorities and public health needs, and then they recommend whether the grant should be funded. So award consideration. So now we're past the advisory board. And I guess this one actually is leading up to the advisory board. How do we decide what's fundable? So we go through everything. We think about is this within a reasonable funding scheme? The advisory board, either leading up to it or immediately after, we have to start talking about things like pay lines and what should we be funding? So a lot of applicants will ask us, what is your pay line? And what that means is some institutes, not all, publish a pay line. And for example, the National Cancer Institute's pay line was 10%. So you had to get within the 10th percentile to have your R01 project funded last fiscal year. However, other institutes were up to maybe 16 percentile. And that just to help you determine your likelihood of funding. Although there are exceptions to that. Sometimes if a grant is on the borderline, we do what we call exception funding after another internal review. The application scores can only be compared against the pay line for that fiscal year. So where that application will be funded. So as you saw, these cycles go over 2 fiscal years. So if you apply in fiscal year 20 and the pay line's like 13, and you get a 13th percentile, but you're going to be paid in fiscal year 21, and the pay line goes down to 11, you're out of the fundable range. So you are not necessarily being funded in the year that you've applied. And as I mentioned, not all institutes publish pay lines. So there are other funding considerations that help us decide what we're going to fund, not just pay lines, but budget appropriations, availability of funds, program priorities, and also we have a lot of congressional mandates from our legislators in the federal government that outline some priorities where we need to spend a certain amount of money. So wrapping up, I'm going to briefly talk about managing the grant award and sharing your results. So now I'm officially in charge. I'm the point of contact. You were awarded your grant and you're very excited. So now what happens? Well, you're required to submit a yearly progress report that is reviewed by the program officer. And a lot of people, I think, really don't think we read them. I read every word, which has been a surprise to some of my grantees. The grantees, yeah, big surprise. The grantee needs to share their results via publications as well as presentations at scientific meetings. They also may be required by the NIH to share their data, to share their model organism, and we have a specific genomic data sharing policy. And so that is what happens from start to finish with grants. And you've now been awarded, and now you're sharing your data, and you've had a successful experience with the NIH. So I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, that's really excellent that we have a sneak peek on what happens from the funder perspective. I mean, this is truly a valuable knowledge, not only for the grant manager in Indonesia and in many places, because we know that NIH has one of the most established and rigorous process for the grants. So this is truly like one of the role models for all of the grant funding all over the world, I guess. And to have such a comprehensive explanation is really, really wonderful, Krista. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So we're going to move on to the next session. And I would like to introduce to you on the persons who are going to join the panel discussion after this. So because Krista is talking about very extensively about the grant management system in the US. And we thought that probably it would be best if we have also a member of the panel to discuss, who is also a scientist in the US. And we have Professor Taifo Mahmud here from Oregon State University. And his field is very close to us, is natural product chemistry, biochemistry. In fact, he got his PhD in Osaka University, apa Taifo ya? But has been living in the US, I don't know, for maybe 20 plus years. And I think we would have wonderful comments from him that he could effectively respond to your talk. And other than Prof. Taifo, as I mentioned, we also have Deputy Managing Director Pak Hendra Hermawan from University of Laval, Canada, the neighbor, who's also asking a question, in fact, in the chat. I think it's a very important question. Everybody here is wondering whether some of the grant schemes that you described is available for people outside of the US to apply.
So with federal funding, it's been increasingly difficult for us to sort of send money to foreign institutions. However, I have a number of grants in my portfolio where there is what we call a foreign component. Probably not the best use of words, but it's called a foreign component. And what that is if you are an investigator and you absolutely can justify the need for using that foreign institution and the expertise of the investigator at that institution, we will approve that. That's something that goes to council. If a certain amount of money goes to a foreign institution, that's one of those advisory council things we have to go and present. Now, for me, this is very common in my grants because my grants are epidemiology. And I actually had a grant when I first started 11 years ago where an investigator was the principal investigator, and she was from Europe. And she was collaborating with United States domestic investigators, but she was the lead. So the money went, the key grant went to France. However, the subcontract awards for all the investigators went throughout the United States and Europe. And because it was such a rare cancer and such a large study in a cancer that we had very little data on, it was very easily awarded. Now, there's been more scrutiny in recent years, and I think there's going to be a little more to come. I'm not sure it's hard to say. There could be some new, there can always be new guidance coming out. But generally, it would be a component on a grant. Now, there are some grants that are training awards, which I know less about, but they are for low to middle income countries and low to middle income country investigators. And there are career awards that are available to individuals in those situations through one of our international centers. So we are not completely opposed to help, funding going to foreign institutions, but it's a little more complicated than just say, sending money to, Oregon State. It's just easier with the federal policies. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Krista. Similar question to Pak Teguh. Actually, you explain about many different kinds of funding calls available from DP. Can we, for example, ilmuwan diaspora who are living abroad apply as a principal investigator, but the research is done in Indonesia?
Yes, thank you for the questions. Yeah, we actually there are some scheme that is available for diaspora to also to get financial support from that scheme. But those scheme is not yet managed by DP. Yes, we try to convince the LPDP that they have to also to consider financial support can be also for the diaspora, but at the moment it's still in the negotiation. But I believe in the future, the either LPDP or others funder will also allow the funding to support the diaspora or whatever the researcher, but they should affiliate it to Indonesian Research Center. That's the one that what we are now to try to convince all of the funders. Thank you.
Yeah, so as long as there is an affiliation in Indonesia, maybe possible ya Pak ya. But completely foreign affiliated, although Indonesian national mungkin belum bisa ya Pak ya. And I also, other than Professor Taiful Mahmud, we will go to you in a minute, Prof. I would also like to introduce, we have the MD for Indonesia, I4MD, and also one of the founders of For Mine Institute, ada Pak Rino Mukti ya. Halo Pak Rino. Pak Rino is like a hub actually, because he is also a part of I4, and also he is a part of the ALMI and For Mine, and he's in both. So he can be a very good hub and bridge. So anyone who is here today, please contact Pak Rino if you would like to interact more with the people who are living outside of Indonesia. And Pak Rino also has an extensive network with those who are in Indonesia. We also have Ibu Dwi Fani, who is a founder of For Mine Institute, and many of our founders are here. So this is a very good opportunity to reach out to them so that we could have a good successful group generated from this panel discussion. Okay, so I would like to go on to Prof. Taiful now to please give your responses to what Krista has been presenting in the second session. Silakan, Prof.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sasti, for the opportunity. Thank you, Krista, for the wonderful presentations. As Sasti mentioned about myself just now, I've been here in the US for 23 years now, since I finished my PhD at Osaka University. And I have written NIH grants for in the past 17 years. So I started in 2003 as a faculty member, and I wrote an R01 grant that falls. And luckily I got funded first time around. So I got another R01 grant in my first year at Oregon State University. So it was very excited. And since then, of course, I have written many grant proposals, and then also I have sat in study sections as ad hoc members in many different study sections. But I found that, listening to your presentation, I found that I'm still learning a lot. So it's amazing, this grant writings is really a lifelong learning, because regulation change, people change, study section, the dynamics change. And the thing that we learned 15 years ago, how to write a winning grant proposals, those are, this is not applicable anymore nowadays sometime. In the past, you have to write, your very specific, for example, your short-term goal, long-term goal, and everything, it's very organized way. And then, of course, nowadays they said, oh, this is very old style and so on. So, but in the end, you really have to make a very, well, first you have to have a very good idea. And then secondly, you make a compelling reason why you have to do this and so on. So like grantsmanship also. So everything that you said really spot on, and I appreciate that. And I think it's really a good insight and a good information to other scientists like us. And of course, I can perhaps fill in some of the gaps during further discussion later on, at least from my own experience. So I think that's all for now, Mbak Sasti. Thank you.
Okay, that's wonderful, Pak Taifo. Yeah, I think we need to learn a lot also from other researchers from other parts of the world, because maybe the techniques, as Prof. Taifo mentioned, changes in different generations, different era, and also because the world is now being very dynamic. Also, we need to consistently get updates actually. And actually, with that, I would like to move to the second question that was asked in the chat. Actually, it's asked by a very senior researcher who is also my teacher. Prof. Tati is also here. She was a former dean of the School of Life Sciences and Technology, where I was working in ITB. Prof. Tati asked actually, how far is the reviewer how far does the reviewer see the track record of the applicant? How far back? I think that would be a very interesting take on the funder or review perspective.
So I think we should both answer this because I see it from the funder side and Taifo sees it from the study section side. So two different perspectives would be great. It really depends on what you put in your bio sketch. So when you're reviewing a grant, you can only take into consideration what is in the application. You can't project out and say, well, I know, or you can't compare different grants and study sections. And you have to think about, if it's not really written in the application, you can't take guesses and various things. So your bio sketch, an investigator's bio sketch is very important, and tailoring it to that application is very important. Somebody, for example, I think you had mentioned Jessica Lasky-Sue had spoken previously at one of these, is that correct?
Yes, in the first.
So Jessica, yeah, she has metabolomics experience and genomics experience. Now, and she's very good at both. Now, if she is I'm just thinking of her because we mentioned her. If she's applying for a metabolomics-based grant, she's going to want to tailor that bio sketch to highlight her metabolomics career and highlight the relevant things back as far as she sees fit to convince those reviewers that she is an expert in this area. Now, her genomics may go back a lot farther, which with her, I think it does. So that would go back farther if she'd be applying for a genomics grant. So that's where you write that up in your bio sketch. And your bio sketch is important to determine your expertise and if you're able to complete the specific aims of the grant. But I'm going to stop there and see what we think about from the side, from the study section, the reviewer.
All right. Can I?
Yes, please, Pak Taifo. Maybe you can fill in the gap or give your own perspective from review.
Well, yeah. So in my opinion, is very important. So investigators, as Krista mentioned, as one of the criteria that we have to evaluate, and then the question is whether are you the right person to do the research. So that means you need to have the expertise, the background, and your team. Where if it is a collaborative research, then you have gathered enough expertise in your team to be successful in the research. And please keep in mind that reviewers are humans. We are very subjective, meaning your reputation matters, and that's the reason why in the US, every investigators, we try to build our own niche, meaning, in our field, so that people, when they look at you, they know immediately exactly what you are good at. And if you, propose something in that area, they will never question about yourself anymore. That's the reason why I think Krista mentioned about that. You have to be careful in applying or writing a grant proposal. That's need to within your expertise of area. You don't, just grab whatever or try to apply for everything, right? So that's the reason why, your publication record, and people look at, the quality of your papers as well. If you have hundreds of papers, but they are all in the, kind of low level, journals, and people start questioning your, credibility. And so numbers, of course, matters, but quality of research, and then people, if they read your papers and they start feeling like, okay, this investigator is not very, careful, or not very, detailed, then, that's, again, the humans, we are humans. So somehow, of course, we are told, not to put too much emphasis in the subjective opinions, but at the end of the day, that's the reality. So so please, try to build your own expertise in certain area, so become an expert in that area. So when people look at your grant proposal, they will not question your credibility anymore.
Okay, thank you banget. Thank you so much, Pak Taiful. Ibu Prof. Tati, mungkin ada tanggapan? Perhaps you have a response to the two questions, to the two answers.
Okay, thank you very much. Especially thank you for Dr. Zanetti. Your presentation is very interesting. Yeah, I'm asking the question because for the middle career or the end career, nowadays, omics, for example, is something new. So we cannot build the track record in that area. So that's why, but of course, I'm agree with Professor Taifu that we have already the track record in other aspects. So maybe, yeah, the reviewer is a human. I'm agree with that. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to respond to that really quickly. Like the example that was brought up on the first question in the last talk about, I'm interested in obesity, nutrition, and the metabolic factors. Well, maybe, you have a good track record in looking at the nutritional aspects of obesity, but you now want to apply an omics technology to that. You've been working in the area of metabolism. It's not a far stretch to apply metabolomic technologies at that point. Right? So you're still with it. I call it your brand, and it's kind of a US sort of thing that we say, building your brand. So whenever they say Krista Zanetti, they say, okay, population-based metabolomics. It's like an instant thing. And in this case, I think exactly you're right. It's not a far stretch to go from something like nutrition and obesity to add an omics component. But if you're going to go, or even to microbiomics, but if you have been working primarily, so maybe you decide that you're going to do nutrition and obesity, but all of a sudden you want to decide that you're going to be an expert in dietary assessment, but you've been working in metabolism. That's probably not going to work out as well for you. So that's kind of just a real life example, I think, of what we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you so much.
If I can add a little bit, Butati. So I think the way, out of this is for you, perhaps, if omics is not your strong, expertise. So
yeah, I'm ecologist.
Definitely collaboration is a way to go.
Yeah.
So, find collaborators. Even I think it's even strengthen your proposal, because you have really, rather than you try to learn yourself, and people know that, oh, well, 1 or 2 years experience, that's not, you cannot call it an expertise. Yeah. So collaborate with Sasti or somebody else. So perhaps, that would make your grant proposal much, much better.
Excellent advice.
Okay, so that is actually one of the things that ForMine Institute would like to achieve. We keep the present sessions small enough so that we could interact with each other more closely, and then hopefully, like, these are very, very selected participants who are expert in their own area, and we could make a team of successful researchers that probably would make use or we can facilitate this kind of team of expertise, different expertise. Pak Teguh Rahardjo, if you're still with us, later on I would like to also ask whether the same goes for DP. Jadi seberapa banyak kalau DP? How do you assess? How far back do you assess the expertise of the applicant?
Okay. Yes. Usually we first request the let's say the expertise for the publication for the last 5 years. The recent publications.
Yes.
But in our scheme, usually, of course, the reviewer will review the track record of the PI. But in our criteria, PI is one, but the group is also should be strong. So that's why the PI should be working with others, researchers, others different disciplinary, and also the important thing also, they have to describe the work breakdown structure very clearly. What is the role of each member and so on. So the reviewer will see all of the capability within that team. That's I think will really give some good value for the proposal.
Thank you very much, Pak Teguh. Okay, so because of the time, I would like to limit the questions. Just 2 quick answers from Krista, please. From Professor Oki Karnarajasa asking, how do you get the money for NIH? That's one. And the second one, maybe you can answer directly because Pak Adrian noticed that some of the research or data, which is published by a non-US authors, is it true that the data sharing you mentioned in the presentation can be accessed by non-US researcher, and how is that possible? So maybe 2 quick answers from Krista.
How do we get, so just let me clarify, who gives us the money?
Yes, from the government, funding, or how?
Okay, so we get a congressionally, our budget comes directly from Congress. So just really quickly, we have House of Representatives, we have the Senate, they approve a budget. The White House or the president signs off on that budget. It's called an appropriation. And we get an appropriation for every fiscal year. And as part of that appropriation, the National Institutes of Health gets a specified amount. And those amounts go out to the various institutes. They get their appropriation for the year. And within that appropriation, the directors sort of start to determine how that will be used. And you can look at any of the institutes, and it will be whatever fiscal year's budget plan. You can pull that right up on any institute and read how they are going to spend their money for that fiscal year, because we have to be transparent, because what it ultimately, the money is it is taxpayer dollars. So I basically probably pay part of my salary. So taxpayers give the money to Congress, Congress allocates it and appropriates it to us. That's the first one. The second one was, how do people access the data? That depends. So I'm going to give a couple of quick examples. So I'm sorry if it's a little over time. For example, we have, I'm going to use Metabolomics Workbench as an example. That's where we deposit all of our metabolomics data. That is freely available for you to access. You can go in, and it's an open source database. We also have many other sort of, and the ones that are non-human subjects, I have a little harder time with because I'm not as familiar. But for our genomic data, it is secured access data because it's identifiable. Even if the individual data isn't identifiable, you can put genomic patterns together to identify. So there are much stricter regulations there. You have to apply through the Data Sharing Access Committee for that type of data, and all institutes have them. For other groups, they're a little looser. There's a consortium of metabolomic studies where that is managed by the National Cancer Institute. It's 67 prospective cohorts with existing data. You can join COMETS as a member. You can also submit a proposal. There are 3 proposals per year. You can write a proposal, it's reviewed, and you can access that data, but in a fashion where you collaborate directly with the investigators and you all work together. So there are various ways to do it, and there's no one straight answer, but I'm happy if you have specific data in mind to see how you would access that. So sorry that was longer, but it's a complicated.
Okay, so I think we understand that there are various ways to access the data, and one of the thing that I would like to point out, all of everything, is the importance of collaboration and the team within the team, because it's most likely nowadays it's very rare that we apply as just as an individual researcher. Usually we work as a team, and a team with multiple expertise. And also we're very lucky that Pak Taifo is here, and Pak Taifo is eligible for many of the grants, and it's possible, I hope one day, that we have a joint US, for example, NIH DP scheme, perhaps Pak Teguh and Pak Bu Zanetti later on can connect. And then we have the I4 researchers, we have the MD from Indonesia. Many of the ForMine and ForTi researchers are also here who are eligible to apply as a researcher from Indonesia and from various regions that are already explained. And Pak Taifo also can gather researchers that are available to partner with Indonesian researchers living in Indonesia. And Pak Taifo, as a managing director for I4 United States and Canada, can also connect us with other researchers within the region. So we have, for example, we have someone from Switzerland also, Prof. Azarzam, who's also here, who's eligible actually as one of the member country for the scheme that Pak Teguh mentioned, and Pak Wahyu Sesendra also is also here. So I think just from this 50 group of people that are in attendance today, I think we could hopefully prepare ourselves for the next coming grant application that is available. So with that, I would like to close the second session and end this with group picture, because some of the people just joined in the second session and could not join the first photo session. So if you would like to join the photo session, to please turn on your camera so that we can take a picture of everyone in the group. Okay, so we have many beautiful pictures. Saturday night being very productive, getting money for our research. I'm also still very much awake, even though it's almost midnight here in Japan. So I hope people who are in Indonesia are still awake also. All right, now I'm going to take a picture in the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, the next one, please. Okay, Pak Lisman is also here, ya Pak. Pak Lisman, beautiful smile. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, Pak Rino sudah nyala. Ya, 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to end the talk by giving it back to Pak Taifo could you please make a concluding remarks, Pak Taifo, before we before we end this?
Okay. Thank you, Mbak Sasti. Well, I would like to congratulate ForMind Institute for successfully organize this very important webinar. And of course, I would like to thank the presenter, Krista and Pak Teguh, for the wonderful presentations. I think this is something that we need to keep thinking and developing from now. Especially nowadays, the Indonesian government encourage collaboration between Indonesian scientists with Indonesian diaspora outside of the country, including us here in the US and Canada. And currently, I have been collaborating with several of them. But the problem is that the funding mechanism really fund the Indonesian part, but nothing really come to the diaspora's lab. But the reality is, sometimes because of the limitation of the instrumentation and so on, some of the research need to be done abroad. So finally, we have to find money from, our faculty development account or from somewhere else. But of course, not every diaspora has that luxury to use money from somewhere else. So I think, if in the future, if we can, or perhaps Krista and Pak Teguh can talk about some kind of, joint funding scheme that can benefit both the, in this case, Indonesian scientists and also the US scientists, that would be wonderful, of course. And also, I think moving forward, one of the problem that I see, or I guess the difference between the US system and the Indonesian system, really regarding the post-award, funding administration. So that's big difference. So I think, of course, in the US, the administration of funding at the university level has been developed very well, and everything's run smoothly. But based on my conversation with many Indonesian scientists, they have a bit quite a challenge for them to administer or to organize or to deal with the funding, especially the reporting and everything need to be done by individuals and so on. So that's something that we need to discuss about more, and then perhaps the funding agency in Indonesia can also learn from, the experience that has been, the thing that has been available in other countries. So I think that's all I can say at this point. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and apologize for any, words that may be not appropriate, but I think this is a wonderful webinar. Thank you, Mbak Sasti.
Yeah, thank you banget. Thank you so much, Prof. Taifo. So I would like to invite everyone to thank Krista and Pak Teguh and Pak Taifo for a very wonderful seminar. And before I close, I have a very small surprise to Krista and Pak Teguh. Actually, we prepare something for you. And this is a very personal gift from us as a big thank you for your very kind contribution to today's seminar. So we really thank you for sharing your wisdom with the scientific communities in Indonesia. And this is your picture in front of a very iconic temple in Yogyakarta, Java, Indonesia. It's called Borobudur Temple, perched on top of the hill, and it's been built since the 7th century. Krista, I hope you will be able one day to go to Indonesia and visit this. And I'll be sending you this photo for you. Thank you so much, Krista.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you all so much for your active participation today and allowing me the opportunity to speak with you. I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Krista. And also for Pak Teguh, we also prepare something for you, Pak. Maybe now we still cannot travel, but I hope that after the COVID pandemic finish, you can also visit Danau Toba. Ini kampungnya Pak Taifo, bukan Pak? Yeah, Pak Taifa is from there. So Pak Teguh Rahardjo, thank you so much for your time and for staying with us until this late in Saturday night. Thank you so much also to Mas Adam, Pak Teguh, who has been facilitating Pak Teguh's involvement as a speaker today. Terima kasih Mas Adam Bakhtiar juga ada di sini dari DP. Okay, so I would like to remind everyone to please like and subscribe our YouTube channel. We have so many useful resources that are freely available that can be a learning tool for young researchers and also for senior researchers. And also our Instagram always updates you with the recent information and announcement on our events. And I would like to really thank our partners for dedicating for your dedication, for partnering with us from Ristek Brin, Formine Institute, also partners with Formine and also Ikatan Ilmuwan Indonesia Internasional. And for the next week's seminar, please don't miss Professor Roy Goodacre. Krista knows him very well. He's one of the world's most cited researchers, I think, with a H index of close to 100. He has 500, so I think, something publications, very high cited, and also he's the editor-in-chief of Metabolomics Journal. And he's a very excellent speaker also to talk to you about how to publish. And we also have the following week about in the industry and academia partnership, which is equally important topic for us researchers on how to get grants from the industry and also how to make a successful application in industry. And we also will have people from startups who are experienced startups, company science and technology-based startups, and see what kind of innovation that they are looking for and how they fund these kind of startups. So we will have, for example, the CTO and managing director of Indonesia's biggest startup company. He's still 39 years old, I think 1 year older than me, but he's the CTO because he has won many grants of startups when he was a student in the University of Tokyo, Japan. And Ritu Saxena is from the Astellas Pharma. It's the biggest, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in Japan. That's the US brands. She's the Associate Director of Analysis. So please don't miss our next events as well. And I would like to thank everyone for staying with us until the very end. And I would like to thank our speakers once again. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye. Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak sudah hadir. Krista, hope you have a nice weekend. Pak Teguh, Pak Taifa, dan rekan-rekan semua, terima kasih banyak sudah hadir. Seperti reuni ya, ada Pak Acep, Bu Ana, Pak Topik, ada.
Saya Liv ya.
Yeah, so we are a group of like Indonesian researchers in Indonesia. Many of us are here. Usually we meet annually.